debate. So, Cllr Jo Bird.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am delighted to represent Brombre Ward and all the people in it, and following in the footsteps of Councillor Warren Ward, and I'm honoured to give my first real speech to Council for the many, not the few. The number one issue for my constituents is the huge gas explosion that devastated New Ferry in March last year. Children and adults are doubly devastated, not only by the explosion itself, but also by the selective compassion shown by this government. Some families, like Christopher Powers, are facing their second Christmas in temporary accommodation. In the language of war, they'd be called internally displaced refugees. And disasters can happen anywhere, at any time. When disaster struck in Salisbury, London and Belfast, the government chose to rip up their rulebook and paid out quickly. £7.5 million was given to Salisbury businesses for loss of trade, but not a single penny has come for traders in New Ferry. Why? Is it because, as Alison McGovern MP said, when it comes to helping people, you can never trust a Tory? Prime Minister Theresa May, you know, the strong and stable one, and the Secretary of State, James Brokenshire, they're about as likely to win friends in the Wirral as to win the next general election, and we say, bring it on. Because 20 months ago, in an instant, 39 people were badly injured, 68 people needed rehousing. Shrapnel shot out 700 metres, damaging over 100 homes and shops, and 10 businesses closed instantly, losing 20 workers their jobs. The police cordon around the crime scene lasted for weeks, and 2 criminal trials will start in January. If this happened in your community, you would be right to expect the government to help. People on the Wirral have responded brilliantly. We gave first aid, money, food, clothes and hugs, and every worker did the best in unique and very difficult circumstances. Now Wirral Council is also making a good start on physical regeneration. The council will spend £1.3 million capital to buy derelict properties for new housing, and £500,000 is coming to improve the shopping precinct. But just as important as bricks and mortar is the rebuilding of lives and livelihoods from the rubble. A common experience for survivors like Ming Nicholson is that they received only a few £100s for their emergency costs. Why was that? Given that the common practice in other places is for a flat rate, not means tested, hardship payments would be paid out fairly quickly as standard. I'm very pleased that it is announced today that a hardship fund will be established to make payments to people directly affected by this disaster. And Wirral has repeatedly sent detailed letters to government asking for help. The council has spent £560,000 dealing with this disaster and reclaimed £215,000 in chargebacks to insurance, landlords and residents. The Belwyn Disaster Scheme should reimburse Wirral Council, but this government will only consider that, it seems, after the council spends almost £500,000. So there could be a gap of £183,000 for our council to make payments, to meet the government's threshold and to help heal the wounds and transform the lives of devastated people and traders. In conclusion, I would like to thank the inspiring community of New Ferry, Port Sunlight and Brombre, who have patiently taught us so much about the injustice of their situation. We are on a long and painful journey together. The community is tenderly emerging, like a fragile butterfly from a chrysalis. And as a Wirral councillor, I would like to apologise to people directly affected. I'm sorry that some of the safety nets didn't hold you, and I'm sorry that it's taking so long to do right by you. Fellow councillors, please support this motion. Let's take action to find a way to make disaster payments of at least £183,000, and let's formally apply to the Belwyn Disaster Scheme and insist that the government honour their promise to help. Please vote for this motion for both government and council support, and please support people directly affected by the New Ferry explosion. Thank you.
Open the debate. Any speakers? Councillor Jeanette Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep this brief. Congratulations, Joe. It wasn't quite your initial speech, it's your second one, but well done on both. I wholeheartedly support the spirit of this motion. I live very close to where the explosion took place, but I have to say that the council's response was exemplary. And every time I walked out my front door, I seemed to see David Ball. He's not here, so he won't mind me saying that. On bank holidays, on Sundays, he was there. It did devastate a number of lives and continues to do so. And I am pleased that we have agreed to look at putting a ring-fence fund aside for New Ferry residents who continue to be impacted by this disaster. I think the Conservative government should be hanging their head in shame at their lack of response here. It seems to me because we're a Labour North Western Council, we just didn't get a look in. And that's in stark contrast to the responses, the quick responses that we've seen with Belfast and Salisbury, to name but two. I'd just like to pay tribute to the hard work of your predecessor, Warren, and continued hard work of Joe Walsh and Irene Williams. You've all been absolute beacons of your community, and you've demonstrated how much heart and soul that New Ferry has and will continue to have going forward. And I'm really, really happy to support this.
Councillor Phil Gilchrist.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too remember walking through New Ferry with Warren Ward and David Ball a few days after the disaster. It is saddening that it's taken so long to get some resolution to some of the issues and that some are still not solved. I did read the new Cabinet report, Mr. Mayor, and I read the original report on New Ferry, which I think was about 50 pages, with various options about how to redevelop the area. I think it would be helpful if the members in charge of regeneration and housing and such issues could pull together a progress report on what's actually happening with the negotiations with the government, with the Homes and Community Agency, or whatever it's now called, because I lose track of the name changes. I also lose track of the number of ministers of housing we've had over many years. But it would be helpful to see if there's a strategy for the recovery of the community that isn't just contained in this motion, but is helpful in setting out a programme of things the council might address on that behalf of that part of the borough in the coming years.
Councillor Adam Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I begin by congratulating Councillors Jo Bird and Sharon Jones on their maiden speeches. Mr. Mayor, it is clear that the disaster faced by the New Ferry community has had a lasting impact on the people who call New Ferry home. The community of New Ferry has been due investment for a number of decades. Mr. Mayor, I'm glad to see that the recommended action in this notice of motion to apply for funding through the Bellwyn scheme, which we have raised before in previous notices of motion. Mr. Mayor, I'm also pleased to see the bid for the devolved funding from the Liverpool City region as well to help the community of New Ferry. Mr. Mayor, over the last 2.5 years, we've heard a lot about left behind communities and the need to hear their voices. Having sought assurances from government on numerous occasions on the route to obtain funding, and in the light of the change in decision with respect to the Hinckley fire mentioned in the notice of motion, which has many similarities with New Ferry, in my opinion, council officers and local residents have complied with the ask to produce a regeneration plan, and it is now time for the government to act for the people of New Ferry.
Councillor Irene Williams.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly support this motion. It's very clear that people, 20 months on, emotions are still raw, businesses have been lost, and I was there at the beginning, and I saw, you know, when people was so, it was so basic, the needs. They were just like refugees. They were out of their homes, couldn't go back to their homes, and they had nothing. We've moved on from that now, and people have had 20 months of trying to cope and being devastated, and particularly people that have got businesses that probably most of their waking life they would be thinking about those businesses, and now they're gone. They're completely, all that's left in some of the cases is the land, and you know, a lot of the houses, the residents and the businesses have just had to be demolished. So I wholeheartedly support this motion, and I hope that the disaster fund that's been set up, that this will this will help the people of New Ferry to recover from this terrible disaster. And I also think that the government should help, and they should support it. You've only got to look at photographs of Belfast and New Ferry. New Ferry was like a bomb site, to see that there is a much more devastating disaster, and they should. It's not fair. They should have had the funds. So I wholeheartedly support this motion.
For no further speakers, go to the seconder, Councillor Joe Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Congratulations to Sharon Jones and Jo Bird on their first speeches at Council. Okay. Mr. Mayor, the first paragraph of this motion states, Council notes the impacts of the explosion at New Ferry has not gone away. You know, some families are facing now the second Christmas temporary accommodation. Some businesses have shut up shop. Well, I was there on Saturday. We opened a drop-in centre on Saturday for people to apply to the local welfare assistance. And he's actually a business owner. For the first time in 12 months, she could bring herself to come to New Ferry. She was that traumatised by the explosion. So the people, you know, people are still feeling the effects of the blast in New Ferry. I can remember it well. 3 o'clock in the morning it was when I first got the notice of the blast. And I went up there at 3 o'clock in the morning. There was fire service, ambulance, and all the rest there. There was the Salvation Army, I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But there was a tea hut set up, giving out whatever support they could. The residents were still traumatised, wandering around in a dazed state, most of them. And we ferried them down to the Life Centre opposite Bedrington Station there. And back, and all night we done that. And praise has to go to, I don't know whether it's been mentioned before, but ex-councillor Steve Niblock. 5 o'clock in the morning, he got the call with the exclusion zone. When it got narrowed, because we couldn't use the village hall because it was still inside the exclusion zone. But Steve Niblock was there at 5 o'clock in the morning, along with Margaret, who volunteered their time, making bacon sandwiches, cups of tea, all day from 5 o'clock in the morning, that was. So, you know, this is a very, very, I mean, you know, I totally agree with everything's been said, but this blast was unique. You know, we've never seen nothing like it. Sorry, from the time. We've never seen nothing like it, and you know, I appreciate it's still under criminal investigation. But please support this motion. 2 minutes is not a lot. 3 minutes is not a lot to say on this, but please support the motion. And like I say, totally agree with everything Jo Bird has said on the agenda. And this government needs to act now. It needs, you know, to wake up to this. We've seen similar disasters. We've seen Belfast being mentioned. We've seen Salisbury. You know, the government out there are a wimp. And they were there within the next couple of weeks and they helped it out. Why can't they help New Ferry? Get off their hands and help New Ferry. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Now, Councillor Bird has proposed to the motion. You have a right of reply to address the Council for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's very heartening to see cross-party support for New Ferry and this motion. There was a lot of, indeed, very professional support provided for people of New Ferry and those affected by the disaster, particularly in the first couple of months afterwards. But my constituents are saying that after that, they feel that they were left. They were left to fend for themselves. They were left to fight their own corners. Meanwhile, the houses and shops are left derelict, and some were actually demolished. And this kind of dereliction of New Ferry, it shows up large holes in our collective safety net. These holes have been ripped into by the Conservative government. The budgets to Wirral Council have been super slashed. Families rely on a social security system that I think was designed by Ebenezer Scrooge himself. It seems to be designed not to pay out to people who need it. And workers generally suffer increasing insecurity, low wages and 0 hours contract. So our safety net is kind of ripped to shreds there. And it seems the government are playing a bureaucratic blame game. The government blames Wirral for not spending enough or not submitting the right paperwork. And it's like Scrooge finally deciding to help the Cratchit family, but only after they've filled in the right paperwork and after they've spent all their last pennies. This isn't good enough. The government needs to intervene now. And the council needs to review the lessons learned, look at a progress plan as well, and see what else it can do now too. Thank you.
Thank you.